Welcome back, everybody. This is A Gray Maybe. My name is Jillian Schmitz. I'm so glad you came back. If this is your first time, I'm so glad you decided to listen to this episode. Today, I have a really fun guest. I know it's going to be fun because I know she's younger than me and probably everyone else I've had on the podcast. And to me, that automatically means fun. So this is a Gen Zer. If you don't know me very well, you don't know how obsessed I am about the Gen Z generation. I'll try not to go too into it because it's actually really about her solely, but I love Gen Z. I think they have a lot to teach myself and older generations. I highly respect their generation. And I'm so excited to actually have someone from that generation on this podcast because it seems to be the theme for a lot of recovery that people are a bit older. They've kind of settled into their situation and now they're ready to talk. So it's not always that I get someone younger who's been in some kind of recovery and is willing to talk about it. So that is very exciting. Today, my guest's name is Bailey Coates. Bailey is a musician. She's a singer. She is a dancer. She has songs out in the world that you can actually consume. She's on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, Pandora, Amazon Music, Deezer, and Tidal. Those I'm too old to know anything about. But for if you're younger, you might know what those are. She's also on IG and TikTok. I will link all those in the show notes. And Bailey, the reason I even know Bailey, a little bit from dance community, but because she inboxed me very early into this season of Airing Gray Maybe, and she mentioned that she had experience in this realm. And I was so touched that anytime someone reaches out, it's always really heartwarming because this is kind of a vacuum, you might have heard me say before. And so when someone takes the time and has the the guts to say something, the courage to say something, especially if you don't know someone personally, it's really heartwarming, and it speaks a lot of their character. So I got this really great message from her, and she's been in my back pocket and in my mind since. And I follow her on TikTok, kind of spy a little bit, see what's going on. And so I asked her if she would come on, and she actually said yes. So everybody, welcome Bailey Coates to the Gray Maybe podcast. Bailey, is there anything you'd like to add? Anything about yourself? Anything I might have missed or misspoke?
Well, Jillian, I have to thank you because actually the reason why we even connected was because a mutual friend of ours, she had a birthday event that was one of your classes. And I had not ever actually taken a heels class, let alone like a cabaret class, and felt empowered enough to actually come do it. So I cannot thank you enough for just your spirit being so open and welcoming to all that you meet. But honestly, I moved to LA only about a year and a half ago. So still getting plugged into the community can definitely be a little bit challenging, and cannot thank you enough for being a person who just so welcomed in and made me feel very much at home. So again, I'm so honored to be here and just cannot thank you enough for having me today.
Okay, so Bailey's really undercover because she came to my class and she's like, I'm a singer. I'm a dance. I'm a singer, but this girl's a dancer. So don't let her fool you. She's got a lot of dance in her back pocket, whether that's just natural or whether she's on the down low going through it. She may not be, in the thick of it, like some of these dancers that are going to all the classes, doing all the things, but you had no problem picking up movement. That combo that day was not particularly easy. It was one of my more advanced combinations, and you had no problem. And you were in some heels. And you were probably doing lyrics because that's going to be your steez. Anybody who's a singer comes to my heels class, I'm like, well, and they're like, well, I'm more of a singer. I'm like, cool. So you sing, just go ahead and sing. We'll get you working on that because that's what you're going to do anyways. You're not going to be doing backflips if you're singing. I mean, unless you're on a wire and you're pink, but we'll get, that's a whole
Facts.
other, there's, possibilities, but I'll move forward with what I want to hear about. I want to hear about you. So, and also, she has her lovely puppy in the background who I get to look at, who might maybe make some noise. I probably not. She looks very well behaved. I have animals that make noise on this podcast a lot before. So,
Listen, it depends upon the hour of the day. We're like, are you choosing violence or are you choosing to be calm? We will see where the dice rolls. But for now, we're good. We're in the clear.
She's like a cat dog.
Basically,
I have
yeah.
cats. They choose violence every day. It's not if, it's when. Okay, so my first little question for you here, it's a big question, actually. I shouldn't call it little. As far as disordered eating, eating disorders, body obsession, all that stuff, do you remember when that kind of began for you? Do you remember some early behaviors of that, or were there experiences that you recall that kind of just stand out now, kind of as you've gone through some recovery and you kind of look back?
Absolutely. I think what's so funny is we tend to overlook certain habits and behaviors that end up taking on a whole life of their own as we get older. And even as certain experiences can trigger these different behaviors to turn into something we may never have expected, especially with disordered eating. For me, there's a moment I can pinpoint exactly whenever my mindset completely went from being, let me obsess about things, to let me obsess about my body and let me obsess about what I put into it and how I actually eat. And that was, I was 12 years old. I went to a small private school whenever we were living in Florida at the time as a family. And in that kind of small environment, there were only about 23, 25 kids total per grade. And so you either had the girls that were really a little too mature or you had girls that were really immature. And I was kind of hanging out with the girls that were more on the mature side. And with that, we had a complimentary guy friend group. And one of the boys looked at me and said, "You're the chunky friend of the friend group." Yes. Will never forget that feeling. And I remember going home that very day, opening up the garage doors. We had an old treadmill in the garage, and I got on there, pounded the pavement, was like, "We're not stopping till we do 3 miles minimum," and went back into our little snack area and only grabbed craisins and would like pick here and would be obsessed with this one particular snack. And so what I ended up realizing that I was struggling with was not only about a bit of anorexia, but also ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. So I would pinpoint certain things I would rely on so heavily and then would avoid everything else and would mask it by just making it look like I was, moving food around a plate or whatever it was. But that one moment is what sent me into a tailspin, and it ended up affecting a good part of my adolescent years.
Okay, now tell me what that, did you say an acronym for what that was? Okay, what is it?
ARFID. Avoidant,
ARFID.
FID.
And it stands for?
Avoidant restrictive food intake disorder.
Okay. I have not mentioned that on the podcast. I wasn't even aware of that. So I'm so glad you said it, because I want to be as inclusive of all the things as possible. Because for me, and I'm sure in early listening to the podcast, I've been pretty redundant and repetitive about the fact that I didn't feel like I qualified. So I want everyone who listens to know they qualify on some level, because if you're kind of listening, you're probably already in the realm. There's probably some things that you're already doing or you've thought about or you're kind of involved in. And so I'm so glad you brought that up, and I'm going to link some literature to that acronym at the in the show notes. So it's so interesting that was that stands out as that moment, because I think a lot of us have had that moment where if you think back hard enough, if you really think about it, you can pinpoint that moment when you realize that you weren't okay as who you were. And it's usually in that really early pubescent. I'm finding some people, it's when they're 5 or 6, which is it's all terrible. But when you're that young, it's got to be just so compounded. But in that early prepubescent or pubescent era, time where everything is so already really rough, are you a kid? Are you an adult? What's your body going through hormonally? How you fit into the world? Your brain's starting to really kind of put everything together. And, I teach teenagers in that kind of, the youngest being in that kind of very sensitive age and all the way up to 18. And I'm just I watch them kind of really go through it about everything. And it's not, I think there's this really weird, it's not weird. It's unhelpful. There's this unhelpful idea that teenage girls are just overly emotional, or that there's, this downplaying, juvenilization of their feelings and thoughts. And I think that is such a mistake. And I think it's kind of where we've gotten, why we are in a lot of this predicament, is because that doesn't get taken seriously, and nobody, just gets written off. So you had that experience, 12 years old, and you were like, ding. And so I'm guessing that was the propellant, and then that just kind of continued on, because what a great way to find control at a young age, because I know for me, that's what a lot of it was, even if it took me a lifetime to figure it out. It's kind of the best way to grasp some control when you start to feel out of control at that age.
Oh, for sure. I mean, coupled with the hormones that any seventh grader, I will say, I think seventh grade is hands down the worst year any person goes through when it comes
Agree.
to their academic career. It's awful. Your body changes, your hormones change, your ideas become more open to the world. And there's so many different things that couple into trying to not only navigate your own way as just an individual, but then also trying to understand as to why you're experiencing certain things and feeling certain things. And your whole life is chaotic. So by going back to only being able to control your body, it becomes almost this comfort zone
Hmm.
where it's like, okay, great. I know exactly what I'm going to be doing today. This is what I'm handling. This is how I'm going to treat it. This is how many calories I'm taking in. And it becomes the control aspect develops into an obsession. And it did for me at least. But after that, it was every single day, 3 miles at least, would run incessantly, would do as many crunches as I thought I possibly could, would then avoid food at all costs, would try and make my family think I was totally fine. And whenever we would go to any kind of restaurant, I remember there was an app on my phone. This was like right whenever like maybe iPhone 4 was rolling out. So I am technically a Gen Zer. I realized I'm like the very beginning year of a Gen Zer. Go
Are you
figure.
the eldest of the Gen Z?
I sure am. I'm a 97 baby. So I was like, this
Okay.
is great. I'm
Okay.
identifying
You're
finally
kind of
exactly
right on the
what I am.
cusp. You're kind of the youngest millennial, oldest Gen Z. I am the elder millennial, and I'm not going to say my age, even though I've said it before. You could Google it, you'll find out. It's terrible. But okay. So you got this app on
No,
your phone.
I did, and it was a calorie counter, and it was one of the very first things where you could go to any kind of fast food restaurant, a chain restaurant, and be able to Google exactly how many calories were in each item, the fat intake, the sugars, everything. And I could honestly look at something, easily go through the Chick-fil-A drive-through, could tell you exactly how much fat, calories, how many different like sodium like milligrams were in one chicken nugget. And it transpired for years. And there's still days where I can tell you exactly how many calories are in a particular kind
Hmm.
of cookie. But
Hmm.
that desire to control and the desire to have normalcy and trying to figure everything out at that age developed into an obsession and a horrible disorder that lasted up until I was 16 at least.
Hmm.
And honestly, I didn't even put a name on it until I was 19 years old. I had
Hmm.
no idea what avoidant restrictive food intake disorder was until I was performing at an eating disorder information network charity event in Atlanta. And somebody shared their story with me. And I was like, wait a second, this sounds a little bit too familiar.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's definitely hard to navigate that time in your life, let alone trying to want to be liked by your peers. And for me, I thought, okay, great. Well, if I'm really skinny, then people are going to like me. And if people like me, I'll be really happy. And if I'm really happy, life is going to be great. And that's never how it works out.
Hmm. Yes. So a couple things I did not even consider. So I've considered the younger generation's relationship with social media and how that may, affect or contribute to eating disorders. But I didn't even consider the apps on the phone situation. So, when I was in that kind of age, it was these magazines that were just like, if you looked back, are just like completely toxic and would be canceled in a hot second. Like nowadays, they would not fly at all. These every magazine was like, front to back full of how to be the skinniest, how to, get a guy, how to lose 20 pounds, how to lose 50 pounds. It was just like so toxic for young women. And, you know, I just look back at those and I was like, I know that those contribute a lot. And I know a lot of women of my age range talk about those magazines and talk about a little bit about the media and then also how society kind of talked about things. I was back home recently and just hearing some of the things that the women in my family say around weight gain and loss is interesting. It's not interesting. I'm being nice. It reminds me why some of these fixations were probably and obsessions came about or were, given gasoline. But I didn't consider that the younger generations have all these apps on their phone that they can really get into it with. And it's like a really secretive way to do it because no one's going to go through your phone and you can hide it on your phone and you can make it look like it's something else on your phone and it can like really flourish into this really secretive, like, perfect way to kind of obsess and take up your time. And I was thinking when you were talking about the calorie count of everything, how much brain power that takes to memorize all those things and how much brain power it takes up, how much brain power these situations take up for people who struggle with them. You know, like you have like you're obviously very good at memorizing. You probably could have memorized an entire history book. Maybe you did as well, but you had all that room saved for all of these calories. And I was, you know, similar in that way. I really knew a lot of how much calories were this or that. I mean, I would look it up on the internet old school. I'd have to do like a search per thing, you know, because this was like the early millennia, you know, 2005, 4, something in there. So it took a minute, but I still did it. So you have that at your disposal. That's got to be wild. And I don't even know how to navigate that for people who are younger, you know, like that's a whole other, uh, that's, you know, these magazines on steroids that for now.
That was 2012. That was
Yeah.
whenever it was like the first kind of little applications. I can't even imagine. There's certain things where I definitely do not allow myself to go out rabbit hole these days, especially when it comes to trying to figure out any kind of health fitness app.
Hmm.
Being very, very cautious about that. But just seeing how there's at least 500 different other applications for one thing that you're looking for, I can't even imagine the amount of resources that are available to girls and young like boys and everyone today and all genders. I mean, it's really crazy what is out there and how it can definitely become an obsession and a very strong little comfort very fast since it's right there at your disposal.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because that's not something I even considered, and it's obviously happening. Like, let's be real. I would have done that. I would have done that if it was available to me. I would have done. I would have been logging it every day instead of keeping it in my head. I would have just been logging in a little app and doing all those things. I would have completely taken advantage of that. So, you know, speaking more on social media and, you know, disordered eating disorders, body dysmorphia, you know, all that kind of stuff. What has been your experience with social media? Because you did grow up when that was a thing and kids had it. I didn't have that, I would say luxury, but I don't know if it is. You know, I didn't have to deal with any of that kind of bullying. I didn't have to deal with any of that kind of like the images I saw were in magazines and TV, and they definitely affected me. So I can't imagine that 20-fold with something in my pocket that's kind of endless. You know, it's a newer phenomenon for a lot of the people that I interviewed because most of the people I've interviewed this season are my age or older. So, you know, in your age, that was just part of how you grew up. You guys don't know any different for the most part. You know, is there anything about that you want to comment on or something you want to describe about that?
Absolutely. It's one thing if you can see an image of what you think you should look like in a magazine. It's another thing whenever you are posting a picture of yourself, whenever no one has any idea of what you're hiding or what you're going through, but in your comment section, you're being cheered on to keep on looking this type of way and be like, oh, you look so great here. You
Mhm.
look so pretty. Oh my gosh, are you working out more? Wow, you
Mm.
look amazing. You look so skinny. Oh my goodness. And have those comments that are almost encouraging that type of disorder and that behavior to continue. It's a very weird experience to know that inside you feel like you're dying a little bit, but then on the outside, you're being encouraged to continue to press forward with it. And this was back in the day before we could hide likes, before we could do any of that kind of stuff. It was, how many likes did you get on this photo? How many comments did you get on this picture? How was this? How was that? And so it fed into the whole mindset and the idea that I know I struggle with of, okay, well, I guess because I'm skinny, that's why people like me. And I should be really happy with that. And that's exactly where my mindset kept on driving me forward as I still participate in these sorts of behaviors and really leaned more into my body dysmorphia than I ever had beforehand, especially in that 14, 15-year-old range.
Yes, I have to keep reiterating to people, and I can only really speak on my own experience, but I do find that this is probably fairly common. Those types of comments when you're struggling with an eating disorder, regardless if you're showing it or not, you know, not everybody looks like they have an eating disorder, but if you're struggling with one and people are saying, "Oh, you look like you've lost weight," or "Oh, have you been working out?" or "Oh, what have you been doing?" It is like a fix to a junkie.
Mhm.
It's like giving, you know, an addict their drugs. It fuels you. It is like gasoline on a fire. It is the confirmation, the validation that, you know, when we're struggling, we are dying for, you know, because we're like, oh, good, it's working. Now, if I work even harder, what can I get done? You know, how can I really, you know, at least for me, because that was such, you know, I wanted that kind of attention and feedback, and I wanted to be recognized for my quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, hard work, right? Of starving or sacrificing or whatever that is. And there is also something very much that hits home about the identity of being skinny or being small or being thin or wafy or whatever that is. I have talked to, a few people over time and space that have talked about, if I'm not the skinny one, who am I? If I'm not the little one, who am I? If I'm not the tiny one, who am I? And that might sound really far out to people that don't struggle with this. But if you transferred it to anything else, we are all very much tied to identity, and most dancers realize this when they become of a certain age and they can't dance anymore, or they're not getting the same jobs that they used to get, or they need to transition out of the field for a variety of reasons. If you've been a dancer your whole life, if you started dance at 8, that's going to be very hard. That's going to be a really rough transition. And, you see it in people who retire as well. Like if you retire and that was what you did your whole life, well, who are you now? If you're a mother and then your kid leaves home, like, well, who are you now? People underestimate how much identity and connection to identity can be really, really difficult to change. And that's if you want to change. That's if you want to move on. That's if you feel like you're ready to do that. If you're not even ready to change your circumstance and situation, the identity part's going to be that much more difficult. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So since you have this social media you've always had it and you've always kind of had to deal with it. And, for older people, and if I say older, I mean like 30, 35 and up. So no, that's not old, but like these are very different experiences in the world. Okay. So if I think back to when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, what my peer group thought was everything. Now, I'm not saying that like, oh, if my peer group did a bunch of hard drugs, I was going to do them. Or if my peer group jumped off a bridge, I was going to do them. It's a little less insidious than that, or it's more insidious than that. It's like, what these people think of you or how they accept you is a big deal. So, and it does often mean more than what your family means to you in these moments. So when you see comments from your community, those are like the notes that were passed in my junior high and high school. And in those notes that were passed, we were telling each other how we felt about them. And we were saying, oh, I heard so-and-so liked you, or, oh, you're so cool and sweet. You're my best friend, right? All of these things were being passed back and forth. And that was how we could understand who we were in relation to everybody else, where we fit in and how we felt and how we were being perceived. So that was a very significant part of my adolescence. I can't imagine what that's like on full display for everybody else. And the anonymity that comes with that with some people that feel emboldened to say stuff they would never say in person or even in a note, because, you would see them next class or, next period. So that in itself is a whole other phenomenon. So with all of that, how have you been able to find a way to navigate social media in a healthy manner? Because as a singer, as a person creating art and media, you have to use it. And I don't care what anybody says. Don't come to me and say you don't need to. No, if you're saying that, then you're already like, have what I would call a Hollywood family royalty nepotism, something like, come on, let's be real. Like, let's be real. Stop it. Like everybody who's in entertainment creating art is going to need some kind of social media. Like stop that. Stop with that right now. So how have you been able to kind of navigate that? Or is it kind of like a calculated loss? Or do you kind of have to look at it as like a necessary evil and be kind of strict about it?
I actually had a very interesting experience happen with my social media in general when it came to my own entertainment career. And it is a blessing in disguise that it happened, because whenever it did, I felt like my whole world was ending. But kind of going back to it, my entire social media journey started whenever Instagram, everything was rolling out back in 2012, 2013. And your identity, I mean, that was like our diary where you captured every single possible thing. We're looking back on some of the different posts I had originally submitted out there and published out there. I was like, oh my goodness gracious, I basically documented what this horrible body dysmorphia, like, and everything I went through. And I had a very interesting management situation happen where I was around 18, 19 years old. And unfortunately, I trusted the wrong people when it came to believing in certain different marketing tactics and advertising tactics that resulted in the use of like fake likes, fake followers, all that kind of stuff. So my social media was completely infiltrated with just I mean, complete fakeness. I mean, as social media can already be fake enough, but
Mm-hmm.
this was just complete. Everything was not real. So, through the help of some different consultants later on, I restarted all of my accounts over in March of 2020, right before our wonderful friend COVID-19 hit, as kind of a way to get ready for some new singles we were rolling out and really start over fresh and
Mm-hmm.
start cultivating a community that was actually organic and authentic and real and was no longer questioned by anything else that had happened. So, with that, it erased all the different images that I had
Mm-hmm.
posted for years, and it erased my high school experience, my college experience, everything. And as heartbreaking as it was to feel like I was losing something that was a part of my identity and really did document exactly my growing up and
Mm-hmm.
honestly documented perfectly, you can watch my body change as you go through every single photo
Mm.
previously. It was such a healing and cleansing way that I didn't even really appreciate up until a couple years ago, that I was able to almost restart my relationship with social media over.
Mm-hmm.
And while we're still building and while we're still growing, I'm at least proud enough to know that everything is 100% organic and real. And every single like, every single follower, every single everything is 100% natural. But also, it gave me the opportunity to have a redo and hit that restart button
Mm-hmm.
with how I saw social media. It was no longer, I'm doing this to appease people around me and to fit in and feel like I'm getting the validation from my peers. It's, I'm doing it because it's a great tool and a resource, not only be able to connect with other individuals, but to also be able to document my life the way that I want to now, not as someone who's trying to escape and be well liked by every single person that she meets.
Mm-hmm. I love that story, especially because it speaks also like if you look at the alignment of where your mind might have been in those moments of, doing the things for this outside appearance situation, and the parallel of people who were not following you because they're interested in your music or art, but it's to also contribute to this outside appearance and situation, even though you were being authentic in your experience, what you were going for, what your it was like a self-fulfilled prophecy, right? Like you're living your life for the outside of the world, right? For everyone outside of you and their view. And that brought on a bunch of outside people who are there just to be a part of, or the bot situation, whatever it was, and then to switch it in 2020, which was such a interesting paradigm shift, right? Like, I don't even think we truly know the repercussions of that year and that shift. And I don't think we will know that for at least a decade or more. Um, revolutions don't start overnight. They start in a series of events and circumstances. So I'm optimistic that that can have some long lasting positive effects. But what a interesting story to have that before, have that after, and have that switch happen in 2020. And now you get to, living truly authentically. You also get to interact in a more authentic way on social media. So I'm so glad I asked that question, because I'm like, this could be a throwaway. Everyone's tolerating social media for the most part. At least I know a lot of people are kind of like, it's a necessary evil. We're tolerating it. But that's a really lovely story.
Well, I'll tell you one thing though too. It's actually funny because even the hardest part with navigating social media now, and I'm sure you probably know this from your own experiences, is it's really hard to separate the identity that you once had with it comparative to where you're going with it now. There have been times where I get so frustrated because I'm like, I used to get 700 likes on this photo, but it's also a picture of me at my skinniest in my bones showing, everything else in a crop top, getting ready to go on stage. Okay, maybe not really sure there.
Mm-hmm.
And even getting frustrated with things now of is this actually working out? How is this going? And honestly, outsourcing and getting back to the joy of it is, I think, where so much of my appreciation for this platform comes into play. While we can definitely tolerate at certain points and we all have our ups and downs with it for sure, I think definitely getting back to the reason why we use it and remembering the joy that is behind it of connecting with people and using it for community is definitely where I've been able to kind of develop and mature my relationship with it in years previous and years current, actually.
Yeah, I love that. I've definitely, my relationship with social media has changed over the years, and it's a necessary evil for me now. I used to be so good. Something happened to me in 2020. I was posting every day. I was on it. It was part of my every day, do a post, good for your career, good for your thing, whatever. And then 2020 happened. I was like, I can't do that anymore. I have lost all of my energy. I don't know. I lost it.
Understood.
I lost it all. I'm trying to be, but I did start TikTok. I did start TikTok Really excited about TikTok. I'm into TikTok. People think it's just dances. You're missing out. There's a lot of really, really great content on TikTok. You're on TikTok. You're doing well on TikTok. Um, that'll be linked in the show notes if you guys want to see her on TikTok. Um, is there, did you have like a rock bottom? Like a lot of people who, are dealing with these types of things, they recall like this one thing where they were like, I had an epiphany and I realized I needed help. Or, you kind of mentioned a little bit that you were performing at an event, that you heard someone share their experience and you were like, oh, me. Maybe like, was that moment? Was there a different moment?
Oh, for sure. I think what's so funny about going through any kind of body dysmorphia or disordered eating is your epiphany almost comes in different stages, and you realize certain disorders before you acknowledge others. And for me, that's exactly what happened. I will never forget. I was getting ready to go model. We living in Florida, the whole modeling acting scene was definitely a big thing back in the day. I was like 15 years old, getting ready to go do like some crazy weird little photo shoot with like these ginormous purses and beautiful flowy dresses, all that kind of stuff. It was great. But I will never forget though, after having my hair and makeup done and coming home and having to get undressed and getting ready to go to sleep at night, I hopped on the scale as I did every single night and saw the number hit 102 pounds. I'm 5'7". So for me, I'm like, that, holy cow, we are way off here. But what I even more so remember, aside from the number, was I could actually grab my hip bones fully. Like my hands cupped them completely.
Mm.
And it had never been like that. I'm sure it probably had previously, but I never really was aware of it. And actually being able to turn around from where the scale was and look into the mirror. I'm cupping my hip bones still, and all I see are ribs. I see my collarbone sticking out. I see my face like super sunken. I'm not going to cry. Oh my gosh, it's like weird to
Mm-hmm.
talk about it because
Mm-hmm.
it definitely it puts you back in that same mental state. And I looked back and I'm like, who is she?
Mm.
I don't know this girl.
Mm.
And I was 15 whenever I had that realization. So after that, it started to become something where I was like, okay, I'm like, let me try to eat something else. Like maybe like one more piece of chicken today. Let me add just an extra little chicken finger. And then it turned into, okay, well, let me add some more fruits and vegetables. And then it was, okay, well, I can eat a cookie and I don't have to work out. Okay, I'll be
Mm-hmm.
all right. I was able to work through things as I got older, but that one epiphany moment is what sparked the whole idea of, okay, something's wrong and we need to actually start addressing these behaviors before they get a million times worse and I'm in the hospital. Um, that was the first part with addressing the body dysmorphia. Actually acknowledging the avoidant restrictive food intake disorder did not happen until I was 19 years old. And that was performing at an event. It was one of my amazing choreographers I worked with at the time. He was so sweet and was really involved with this charity dance off that supported the Eating Disorder Information Network, which is based out of Atlanta. And I had a song that was actually about that I really refused to acknowledge it was about that, called Deep Within, that I was able to go and perform. And hearing the stories of the incredible individuals that were at this event and getting to listen to what they were going through and just actually having different diagnoses for what they were experiencing, I was like, holy crap, this is actually the
Mm-hmm.
answer I've been looking for. This is what I did when it came to how I was eating. Even though my body dysmorphia started to become something that I was having a healthier relationship with and was actually addressing and like, okay, we're moving forward. I didn't ever understand why I would gravitate towards only eating certain food items or
Mm-hmm.
why I would only do certain things at one point in time and how I would address my eating habits. And that in itself, I mean, we can say that's how the whole healthy eating and getting healthy and this is what you should do. But if you're not careful enough and if you're not actually doing it for the right reasons, that can turn into disordered eating very easily. And that's what my justification of getting healthy at that 12-year-old, 13-year-old age, all the way up into my adulthood, there was a label for that. And that was ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder.
Mm-hmm. I love that you had that epiphany. I don't what a gift, because I think that people who suffer with body dysmorphia, it's so rarely we see ourselves through accurate lens, right? The disorder is coined by not being able to see what is real. I say often there's this thing floating around on the interwebs on like recovery IG or recovery talk, and it's like a picture of like someone drew of themselves, which is like outrageous. Like you look at the picture, you're like, no one looks like that. Like that's a terrible photo of you. And then it's like, that's what I think I look like. And then it's like, what I want to look like, what I think I look like, and then it's just like a scribble page of what I actually look like. Because as someone with body dysmorphia, you don't actually know, and you can't trust your eyes, and you can't trust your feelings, because oftentimes I will feel like I'm a certain weight that I'm not. I will feel certain body parts are larger than they are. I will see things on my face that other people don't see, and so I wonder like what like that moment was. I'm so glad you saw it, and I'm so glad it happened, and I wonder how it had like what a gift, because that is what is so very much missing a lot from people who suffer from body dysmorphia, is the inability to truly see what they look like, and that's why they can't stop. And this happens with people who are trying to put on excess muscle. There's a documentary called Bigorexia about that, where they think they only see themselves as small, and they're going through these extreme, measures to put on mass and body weight and to look bigger, to feel bigger, and they're like doing some things that are really unhealthy to themselves to try to attain this, because they can't see themselves as big. And we see it in like plastic surgery as well. Like people, that is the same kind of body dysmorphia, that like people will undergo extreme procedures to, they'll fixate on a certain body part and undergo these procedures, and that never is enough, right? It never looks enough like how they want to look. I'm so glad you talked about the ARFID, but also like, in that line of similarity is orthorexia, where people are kind of obsessed with healthy eating, clean eating, which can turn into an eating disorder called orthorexia. I think there's also a lot of ways to hide behind vegetarianism and veganism. I'm not saying that if someone's a vegetarian or a vegan that you have an eating disorder. I'm just saying for those of us who like to hide, it's a really good cover to say no to food and be really stringent and strict. And I can't eat here and I can't eat that and I can't have this because I'm this. And it is a way to hide some of that behavior. I'm glad you brought all of that up. So after you kind of had that experience at I'm calling it a conference, a performance that you did at this event, what were the steps after that? Did you get some kind of professional help, or are you like, okay, I have ARFID, good to know, now what? Was there some steps after that you took, or did you just research the hell out of that and try to figure your way out?
What's so funny is there's so many resources I feel like that we have nowadays. And I mean, post whenever that was actually going on, that was, oh my gosh, I want to say 2017, 2018. So I've upgraded now from calorie counters on my application on my phone to now being, all right, let's look at WebMD. Let's look at everything else. Obsession always trails into different aspects. So no, I started researching so much and wanted to learn more about exactly, I'm like, what is this? Because one of the people that I had met that night, she was this 13-year-old little girl, and she reminded me so much of myself. And I'm like, holy cow. But she had a name though for what she was going through. And just getting to talk with her a little bit, it encouraged me and inspired me to be like, okay, let's take a step back and let's actually understand what this is. So versus me trying to just be overly, Lord knows what I want to actually call it. Words are hard today, but I decided to start researching everything and was just really curious, not from an obsession standpoint of I have to pinpoint what this is and I have to make sure that I'm going to be all right after this. I really wanted to know so I could also actually understand and be able to communicate more effectively with people that I encountered, like this sweet girl, that it's like, hey, you're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know I wasn't alone until you actually encouraged me to do it. So definitely researching became my outlet mostly. I did not seek professional help. And it's something that now in my older years, I have had the opportunity to get to have life coaching therapy sessions one-on-one since it's something I encourage every single person should 100% go to therapy. But I also think my own pride got in the way of that at that point in time. And I thought, okay, well, I'm past this now and I don't need to go do it. But it's definitely interesting whenever you're finally able to identify what it is, able to research something on your own to educate yourself, but then actually able to talk through different things later on. That was where my real healing came into play, especially with my life coach and my mentors in my life, really opening up and having that dialogue and actually discussing it is something that empowered me to be able to discuss it today.
Mm-hmm. That's so great. And I think I'm like very pro recovery, however that looks for whoever. Like I don't, I really don't think there's one right way to gain any kind of recovery or healing. I think that's so individual to each person. And I'm just like such a flag waver for anyone who does any type of recovery. If you Google your situation and you read some stuff on it, I'm like ecstatic. If you're like, making changes and doing things to try to, do better to kind of wean yourself off of the obsession or the situation, like I'm into it. If you get a therapist, great. If you go to a 12-step, great. If you go to group therapy, great. If you find a life coach, great. Like I love all of it. I think it all has a place. Reading books, recovery books, self-help books, like all of it. And I've done pretty much all of it in different areas of my life for different things. And so I'm just so pro recovery. And I'm also so pro continued recovery. Like I'm kind of like, it's kind of like learning to me. Like, I don't think you just have arrived. Like, I don't think anybody arrives like, oh, I've learned everything now. So that's that, everybody. Like recovery, I think is kind of the same. Anytime someone's like, you can be in active recovery and you can have recovery from something, a behavior or an obsession for, a long time, for up till as long as you've been, doing it, or not doing it. But I do think recovery is kind of like a lifelong thing. I think like you just kind of continue to recover. You continue to recover from things that happened when you were a kid. You continue to recover from things that happened to you as an adult. You continue to recover from what the world does to us. Like you just continue to recover. And it can be, for me, I know it's a whack-a-mole game. We've mentioned that on the podcast before. I think Kita Mascaro was one who also talked about whack-a-mole. You knock one, and for me, that kind of obsession, that'll just go down another road. I have to be really careful about how I want to spend my energy and what I'm doing, because I'm not going to change. I can change my behavior. I can change my dysfunction. I can change how I do it. But I am at my core being, unfortunately, I am obsessive compulsive. I have like I have body dysmorphia that causes me to pick my face. It causes me to pick my nails, even if I'm not staring in a mirror, breaking down my self-confidence. I'm doing like it's a compulsion, and people don't understand that. It's hard to explain it to people when, someone's like, well, just stop picking your face. And they're like, I would love to stop picking my face. You think I like walking around with my face like, like chunky and gross and like bleeding, or my nails bleeding? It's not comfortable. It doesn't feel good, but it is a compulsion, and it's part of that stuff. And not everybody has that along with these types of things, but they do kind of go hand in hand. And I really relate to you saying that obsession, because I am also someone who will get on my phone and start researching things, and it does help me. It does help me in a lot of ways to get that kind of information, so that then I can help myself in a bunch of different ways. But I am forever obsessing on something. I have to accept it. That's just how I am. So I really relate
Definitely
to
feeling
that.
on that one.
Yes, I relate.
And I think that's what you said though too, Jillian, is that every single person though, your your recovery looks different in different seasons. Whenever I was 19, it was research. Whenever I was 24, it was, okay, let's actually talk about these different things. And that level of comfort, I feel like, does come into play of also where you are in accepting what the root cause of this actually is. Whether it's being obsessive compulsive, whether it might be going back to control, whether it's any kind of trauma that instigated it. There's so many different reasons why we all go through these potential disorders, body dysmorphia, whatever it is. But to be able to accept the fact that just because something worked for you then doesn't work for you now, it's okay to be able to also adjust your recovery for your own course of where you're heading at a new point in your life.
I love that. I love that you said a season of recovery. Is that what you said? You said seasons of recovery. That's like, seasons of love. Like if you guys know Rent, like 525,600 minutes. That's
Love it.
right. It's seasons of recovery. Like, I'm into it.
Self-love, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
There's always different times.
For real. What would you say today is, and this, of course, it's seasons of recovery, so it can bend and change and morph. What would you say is kind of your relationship today, to food, to your body, to, I always say the dis-ease, or, the disordering, the dis-ease, the, whatever we want to call that thing. I know it's different for everybody, and words can be really tricky for some people. Like, some people are okay with accepting that they have disordered eating, but if you said they had an eating disorder, they'd be like, no, I don't. I was kind of one of those people. It took me a minute to like really wade into the labels. So enter whatever word that is for the discomfort. What would you say your relationship today is to that food body?
So in this season, no, but in all
Yes,
seriousness, actually, I am getting married right now. So I'm in the
that's
process of getting
right.
ready to have a wedding coming up here pretty shortly. June 3rd is the big day, which has been so much fun. We did not have a long engagement, which is honestly a good thing. But I feel like, especially entering into this whole wedding prep, there's always that stigma of,
Sneaky.
well, you
This
have
is
to
a
look so
sneaky
beautiful
time.
on your day.
Yep.
Like, you have to look this certain type of way. You need to fit, like, you need to look so snatched in your dress, and you need to have
Yes.
your skin be so perfect,
Yes.
all this other kind of stuff. And it's actually funny because I definitely have found myself more, it goes back to my obsessive compulsiveness as well, especially when it comes to just the idea of control. Everything, I'm like, okay, I can control what I put in, I control what I do. So it's been definitely tricky to kind of have certain different ideologies come back up again and be like, wait a second, like, should I be doing this instead of what I'm doing here? But it's been interesting, to say the least, when it comes to adjusting kind of how I'm seeing the whole idea of just exercise and fitness, and how that is really so great to be able to become stronger and not look at it as a way for me to completely slim down.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been quite an interesting time. But where I'm at now, to answer your question, I'm excited. I'm happier with it. I feel like I look now at food as, this is my resource of energy. This is how I fuel my day. This is how I'm able to actually be present and intentional with other people. Our community here in Los Angeles, and our community just in general, is super important to both my fiance and I. And so by getting to be our very best whenever we are with people, we both understand that that has to come back of being energized to do so. And understanding that and wanting to actually be able to be present and have those relationships still be able to maintain it the best possible way, I look at my relationship with how I treat my body, how I feed my body, but most importantly, how I perceive myself. That's the number one priority. And I'm definitely happy to say that we've come a long way. But there are days where, it creeps in of, well, you could be doing better. You should be eating this differently.
Oh
So
yeah, that
it's
broad.
that balance.
Yeah, that voice. She's
Oh, it's always
sneaky.
there.
She's sneaky. It is always there. I talk about that a lot, about, who's driving the bus, and that voice sounds exactly like my own. So it's hard sometimes to distinguish between that voice and my real voice. That's right. You are getting married, and that is such a could be trigger tricky territory, because there is absolutely, like, that is a thing. Women looking their best on their wedding day, and unfortunately, best usually equals, to a lot of women in their minds, thin, and that is kind of told to us through various media and society, and so I'm so grateful you talk about that, because it is something that's going to come up for people, and there's things that are always going to come up. I know for myself, if I am not participating in active dieting or obsession of my body, I will then start obsessing over if I have wrinkles, what my face is doing, am I getting jowls, like what is my skin texture, what's going on, like, and then I'm obsessed with, like, do my hands look old? How do I make my hands not look wrinkly? Like, it is just so constant, and it just lily pads. I'm like a frog jumping from lily pad to lily pad of obsession. And and it doesn't always take an event, but usually it's an event. So usually there's something going on that I am feeling uncomfortable about, and it doesn't have to be bad uncomfortable. It can be like, I'm excited, or this is a big opportunity. And usually the bigger the opportunity, the more I'm lily padding around to different things to try to manage my anxiety about it, to manage my feeling out of control about how it's going to go, how it's going to turn out, what my expectations are. So it's definitely like, this is one of those moments that could be sticky for you. You sound like you have like a really good grounded approach to it. And you also are willing to acknowledge when that voice starts to come in, which is really hard. I think that's like one of the hardest things about these types of disorders, is that voice comes in, and sometimes we don't realize that it's entered the chat. We're just like, all of a sudden it's like our brains get hijacked, and being able to differentiate that voice from what you really want to have happen makes all the difference in recovery. And it is like such a staple, like a hallmark, like a landmark of like good recovery and being able to kind of pull yourself back or help yourself out in those moments.
For sure. And it's what's so funny too is before I got engaged and before the whole wedding prep came into play, it was a really difficult time when it came to how I was viewing both my exercise regimen, but also how I viewed food. I was super laxed about it to where I didn't care enough to even actually really contemplate about, okay, well, am I getting the right nutrients? Not necessarily about obsessing about, oh, I need to be skinny, but am I actually feeding my body the way that it needs to be fueled?
mhm,
And before then, it's always been kind of like a hot and cold with me in particular. And I think that's sometimes what can happen is whenever you are in different seasons of recovery, as we're kind of calling it,
mhm,
there's certain times where that obsession becomes, I'm obsessed to be okay. And that obsession to be okay can sometimes almost drop the whole idea of actually taking care of yourself. There's a very, very fine line in actually having a good, healthy balance of, okay, am I exercising because it makes me feel stronger, or am I doing it to be able to get thin? Or am I not doing it at all because I'm trying to justify to myself that I'm okay and I don't need to exercise because I'm
mhm,
comfortable in my body now and I'll be fine and everything's good. It's
mhm,
a very weird little game that our mind plays with us. And sometimes that voice that is telling us, okay, well, you're not doing enough and you should be doing this, can almost turn into the voice that's being like, no, but you love your body now and it's okay. You don't have to do anything to take care of yourself and you're fine. It's
mhm.
very interesting when you have to decipher and distinguish exactly what that little voice is turning into, and also acknowledge and kind of care for it and treat for it in the way that makes sense for where exactly you're at in your life at that point in time.
Absolutely. And you'll see people who suffer with these types of things. A lot of times they'll pendulum back and forth to different
Mm-hmm.
things, right? You've heard on the podcast different people who have gone from extreme restriction and anorexia to overeating and binge eating. Like you can see how that can kind of start to happen when you're really trying to, find what's real in this dialogue in the brain. Um, why don't you think more people within the entertainment industry discuss this topic? Like I think there's been a lot of, I ask people this in the dance community specifically because I find that the dance community has become really outspoken about some things very passionately, right? Inequality, racism have been really big things that the dance community has wanted to speak about, be inclusive, about abuse of power in our industry, sexual abuse, things like that. But at least in the dance community, like no one wants to talk about eating disorders, disordered eating, and it's rampant in that community. And also just in the entertainment industry in general, it's almost just kind of like that's just a necessary evil of the situation. That's just how things are. We don't really care. We need to talk about, greater injustices that are happening, like, racism, which is worthy of a lot of conversation, continued conversation, sexual abuse, power abuse, like in the entertainment, that and music industry. Music industry is kind of shady. I gotta say, like, there's not been enough conversations in the music industry. I think one of the only documentary, well, there's probably been two, but one right off the top of my head was it was Alanis Morissette's documentary.
Mm-hmm.
Is it Jagged Little? What was it called? Jagged Little Pill? It was. I have to look it up. I'll put it in the show notes. But this documentary, she kind of blows a whistle on some things, and she was pretty bold about what she said. And there's been a couple other, but so basically, I'm going on and on. But do you have a theory as to why the entertainment industry, whether that's music, whether that's TV, film, whether that's dance industry, entertainment in general, why this topic doesn't get any mic time?
Yes, I'll give a shameless plug to my most recent single.
Perfect.
It's a lot easier to lie to yourself than it actually is to be honest.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's one of the things that the entertainment industry in general is really good at doing is we put on a show. That's one of the reasons why we all get into this business is because we're performers.
Hmm.
And it's a lot easier to put on a performance of exactly how you're doing and how you should be doing versus actually consulting yourself and being honest with yourself and addressing the issues that are internal that people can't physically see. And whether or not you can actually see an eating disorder, yes, some people you can talk about, some people you cannot. It's a lot easier to pretend like it doesn't exist and to lie to yourself that it's not happening versus actually giving it the time and the space and the conversation that it deserves. I know that's one of the things that, especially getting into my previous management situation, it's always interesting whenever you listen to other people more so than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember hearing their different advice. I mean, one thing was always age. One thing also was relationships about, well, men have to want to date you and women have to want to be like you. That was the mantra that was fed. And even now I struggle with, like, am I too old to have my dreams of being an entertainer? Is my too old to have my career manifest? But on top of that, it's, well, you have to be, with the whole idea of women have to want to be like you, people have to want to be like you, everyone has to want to be like you, that it feeds back to the age old, decades long, everything from society beginning to end of this image that we're fed. And if people want to be like me, then I have to be like the image that I've been fed of this incredibly fit, incredible former entertainer, whatever. And for me, and I'm sure for other people, it's a lot easier to lie to yourself that everything's okay versus actually calling it out and giving it a name.
And that is the title to her single is Lying to Myself. And again, it is on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, Pandora, Amazon Music, Deezer, Tidal. Check it out if you haven't already. We are going to plug, but this is the thing, you know, like, this is the thing, like, you're not getting paid to be on the podcast. Like, I don't pay anybody to be on the podcast. I don't make any money on the podcast. Like, it is, you know, like if I got some ads, if I was getting paid for ads, well, I guess I have one ad for Spotify that like might be on some of the episodes, where I make, you know, like 1 cent every 8,000 hits or something like that, you know? So like I have that ad, but, you know, like, that's what you got to do. Podcasts, like, you're gonna listen to a podcast, you gotta listen to ads, and this ad is for Bailey Coates' new single, Lying to Myself. So that's just, everybody has to tolerate it, and I hope they check it out. And also, you know, because who doesn't want to support someone that they get to know? You know, like, you're being very honest about your experience, you're so well spoken in it, you've got such a good grasp on it. You're like, man, if I had it together like you when I was 25, when I look back to me and myself at 25, that is a fucking nightmare. That is like, everybody, you know, you get older, you're like, oh, to go back. I'm like, I'm sorry. Did you guys have better 20s than I did? Because I was a hot mess at 24, 25, like extra hot mess. So like, I'm like, you give me so much hope, and like your generation gives me so much hope, regardless of whatever everyone's going through, you know, like, I just am so encouraged by, like, look at you just speaking about this at 25, like it's nothing. Like, I could have never done that at 25. And I was like, well, yeah, it's just a whole other thing. So I'm so appreciative of you speaking and being here and telling your experiences. And I want people who listen to people on this podcast to support them. You know, like, if you're going to get free entertainment, if you're going to get free, maybe even recovery, maybe you get a little bit of recovery from some of these podcasts, like, the way to give back would be look these people up, give them some love on the Instagrams, listen to whatever they're, you know, creating as artists, or, you know, consume their art, or, you know, at least reach out and say like, hey, I loved what you said, you know, because it is a vacuum when you're on a podcast. Like, some people will say like, oh, I listen to your podcast. Oh, that was great. But for the most part, it's kind of a vacuum. Just so you know, everybody out there listening, if you take the effort to say to someone who's been on a podcast or a podcast that's going like, hey, I listen, it's great. Like, or hey, I listen, even just, hey, I listen, you know, it's like, it's big. So I encourage everybody to do that for their consumption of media. Is there anything that do you have, like a mantra? Do you have a thought pattern, something that you kind of kick back into when things get hard? I know that you spoke a little bit, and correct me if I'm wrong, about your spirituality. Yes. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Is there anything in there? Like, how do you, like, because sometimes, you know, recovery is an ongoing thing. Every day that you might have to kind of like keep yourself in check. And some days are easier, some days are not as easy, as we talked about the seasons of recovery, right? As life events happen, we're living life on life's terms. So is there a mantra? Is there a thought pattern? Is there some kind of a higher power spirituality, something that kind of helps you stay in the lane that you want to be in from being, you know, going into some of the dysfunction or some of the more harmful habits?
Absolutely. And I'll even go back a little bit too, Jillian. I'm a Christian and my faith is incredibly important to me. And I think whenever I started to actually have that epiphany moment, for me, what I believe that was, I'm like, okay, I'm like, that's God speaking to me. That's
Mm-hmm.
how I interpret it in that moment. And even recovering and doing the research and starting to actually bring things back into my diet, addressing that disordered like, eating and body dysmorphia at age 15. For me, it was going back and read my Bible and be like, okay, then I need to hear these certain verses. I need to actually, if I'm believe these different things, I'm living my life in this kind of way, then I need to really believe this and actually live my life according to these principles and these ideas right here.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting plugged back into different faith-based back verses were really important for me to be able to kind of help address how my eating patterns were at that point in time. As I've gotten older and as I've become more mature in my faith and have definitely gotten the time to be able to research and really just dive into that side of it as well, what's been my big mantra and something that I always revert back to is that nothing is impossible with God. And that's something that's really, really important to me and how I'm able to address certain thought patterns whenever I get a trigger that comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I'm on the Stairmaster, for example, during a workout class, that's not only something that it's not something I'm using as this crutch to be skinny again or whatever it is. It's something I'm using to make me stronger.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, I'm like, nothing's impossible with God. Nothing's impossible. For all things are possible with Him. And that's how I am able to kind of get through my different times and patterns. I think there's a lot of things when it comes to believing in whatever kind of religion, whatever kind of words are hard to say, spirituality, my goodness, anything. I think it's important that sometimes we do kind of address the conversation with that because it can definitely be a lot easier to lean upon our own selves for understanding that there definitely is something to be said for also consulting a higher power, quote unquote, if that's something that you believe in. And I think that's a part of the recovery process that we also don't talk about enough. And that was definitely a big part of mine. But even today, in today's time, that's something that going back to my faith and going back to, okay, if I know that I'm made perfect and wonderful the way that I am, then I have to honor that and respect that and actually be able to cherish that and take care of it because that's my responsibility. This is a gift. In life, we think that we're indestructible as human beings. We go around so flippant sometimes with how we conduct our affairs and conduct our lives and everything else in between that we tend to forget that we're really, really fragile. And even in today's time, like there are certain things that going to the doctor and having a checkup, I realize I'm actually the precursor to osteoporosis. And that's because I completely had vitamin D deficiency going through my very critical adolescent years. And it was things like that of like, okay, I didn't realize how precious this gift is of life and also how precious this body is. So for me, kind of going back to my spirituality and really consulting that and remembering that this is a precious gift that we have such a responsibility to be able to address it and take care of it. And it might take some of us longer than others. And some of us may never have that happen of addressing and recovering. But it is important whenever we do have that epiphany approach to at least remember that life can be gone in an instant. And part of that disordered eating and body dysmorphia can also contribute to that.
Absolutely. And if you go into any kind of a 12-step, if you go into any kind of like very traditional recovery program, like people who go away to the retreat type recovery programs or like inpatient, outpatient, a lot of the recovery programs do heavily encourage some kind of a spirituality. It doesn't necessarily have to be a religious, spirituality or a religion, but they really, really encourage a connection with some kind of a higher power and energy. You can, in 12-step out here, especially, it's really wide and very, very respected as kind of whatever someone wants. If they want to believe in a spaghetti monster that runs everything, it's like, that's your deal. Then, give it up to the spaghetti monster, like hand it over to the spaghetti monster, let him do it or whatever, so that is definitely something that has been tried and true in the recovery world for a long time. It's something that people are constantly trying to help people find a way towards because the stats don't lie. That kind of ability to take all of that stuff and put it somewhere else, right? Put it on something else's shoulder. Take it off of yourself. Take yourself out of the mix. Really let go and let whatever that thing is take over. Is super helpful for people that suffer from these things, and that's addiction in general, or specific to eating disorders. So, if that's something that someone who's listening hasn't considered already, you may want to consider it and find for yourself what that is. It doesn't have to be what everybody else is. I was raised Roman Catholic. That's not a good fit for me. So I've had to kind of find and try on a lot of different things. And as my recovery seasons, as you so brilliantly, coined, as those recovery seasons have gone, that those things have changed. It's very fluid and flexible for me, and I still struggle a lot with it. And I know that that has a direct correlation to my dysfunction in a lot of things. Like, things could be way easier for me if I could really sign on to that thing, and I'm constantly kind of flexing and finding and fluid in it. So, if that's something you have, lean into it. If it's something you can find it. If you haven't found it yet, keep trying. It's definitely something that can be super beneficial. All right, Bailey, I have one last question for you.
Ooh, keep it spicy, Jillian. Let's
Okay,
do
I
it.
think it's kind of spicy. I mean, it's like, and this is the thing. I ask this question and then there's always a long pause. So don't feel like you have to hurry, because it is one of those things that people always take like an inherent pause. Now, saying that, I don't want to put that on you. If you know exactly what you want to say, girl, you just say it. Okay. So do you have, I always say, myself and on the podcast, we don't give advice. So I'll ask, do you have any suggestion for people who might be suffering right now?
This is definitely the inherent pause, because I think there's a lot of response. There's a lot of weight with that question there too. And it definitely
Take
is
your
important to
time.
be responsible with the answers.
Every second feels forever, but every second that someone has paused has been poignant.
Mm. This is going to sound so cliche, but give yourself grace. Not necessarily be kind to yourself, which, yes, of course, you absolutely should be kind to yourself, but this is different. Don't hurry yourself to give yourself a diagnosis. If you know that something is off and if you know that something is wrong, it's okay not to have a name for it. I didn't have a name for at least 7 years for some of the different things I went through. I just knew that there was an issue at that point in time. And I think by giving yourself grace, you also give yourself grace when it comes to your recovery. Nothing happens overnight. And especially when it comes to the healing process and recovering through, whether it's body dysmorphia, disordered eating, any kind of situation that you're facing, you have to give yourself the space, the time, and also the respect to be able to actually address things as you see fit versus doing things according to someone else's timeline. So definitely give yourself grace as you're going through this, and be sure to not let anyone rush you into how you go through your recovery process or how you even go through the diagnostic process as well.
That's amazing. I couldn't agree more. Giving yourself grace is something that I think is easier than being kind to yourself. I'm glad you made the distinction, because when we're suffering with these types of things, kindness may be too far away to give to yourself, but you might be able to give yourself grace. And I say that a lot to people, and I say that a lot to myself. It's excellent, excellent advice. Bailey Coates, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And it was really great to get to know you some more. And you're so good. You're so good being interviewed, and you're so like natural, and you have good things to say, and like singing and dancing. I mean, I'm a fan. I'm into it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Jillian, and thank you very much for being a part of opening up the conversation for more people, because honestly, your authenticity and your genuine just conversation, everything, it sparked me to at least feel comfortable enough to share parts of this with you. So thank you so much for being such a huge part of that for so many people, and I hope that all people listening are able to get to experience that just like I did.
Thank you so much.